Nimbin has a huge history as a special place for Aboriginals, a healing and initiation area. Okay, so many of you have been to these Medicans before. Who hasn't been to one? Good on you. Thank you so much for coming. Never been to Nimbin before? Good on you. Welcome. It's a much maligned community, I reckon, you know. We all had these visions back in the 60s and 70s of how it could be a better planet and a better earth, and a lot of it, inspiration, came from using cannabis, I would have to admit, which has a massive history, you know, culturally, of being a spiritual and medicinal plant. I nowadays can't always separate that, because I think what was spiritual 1,000 years ago, now we've got in a science lab and we've turned it into medicine and we're analysing it all, and we've lost that, the magic bit, if you like, the unknown area. I mean, if it's unknown, it doesn't count almost these days, which is kind of... Nimbin's got a strong, I would call it spiritual edge. We all came here, we've got different values a bit, try not to make money rule everything, and it took me a long time to realise that the people who had gathered here, not everyone is smoking pot here, but a lot of people are, and it's because it was a medicine. In my case, it was a medicine I found that just really worked well for me. I'd struggled with depression, PTSD, I got sent off to boarding school young, it was a really unhappy time. Anyway, when I first smoked pot, it just was magic for me. And a lot of people, I find, have had that experience. So, you know, I moved to Nimbin 30-odd years ago. In those days, it was the heroin addicts selling cannabis. And it's only really... People have generally got to be desperate to take the risk and go out there and be an active criminal selling pot. It's a big enough risk just smoking it, you know. So I've watched a lot of changes over the years. That the hippie kids grew up and thought, you know, well, we're not going to share the weed, Dad's weed, we can sell it, you know. They'd never had a new pair of shorts in their life. Everything came from op shops. So the young kids got into dealing a lot, and the police busted all that up big time a couple of years ago. And I would say Nimbin community is probably as well drug educated as anywhere. We've seen it all. We've got addicts of every sort here, because it's kind of the last bus stop for a lot of people. When you got out of jail 20 years ago in Grafton, if you had nowhere to go, they gave you a free bus ticket to Nimbin. So you know, when we were kind of the scapegoat for everyone, the mad hippies, you know, look, you want to legalise marijuana, go and have a look at Nimbin, mate. So all that's changed. I reckon no one wanted a Nimbin address 10 years ago. But with the arrival of medical cannabis, nothing's changed except everyone recognised, yeah, it really is a medicine. I think our reputation changed a bit and we're not as irresponsible as we used to be. And all those mad ideas like doing yoga or meditation or organic food or permaculture, they're all not so mad now. So the hippie name is not as stupid as it used to be, I think. So it's interesting. So I really appreciate you coming and have a taste of Nimbin, and there's a few different people be talking today. But mostly it's going to be doctors talking, who I really applaud their courage in coming forward and being forward. Catalaris has been a pioneer of the cannabis awareness campaign over the last 30 years. I think we're up to our 27th Mardi Gras. Every year we have an annual on the first weekend of May. We have an annual gathering and protest for cannabis law reform. I think he's been to every one. So he's a total pioneer and a doctor. And Dr. Deb, who's going to talk first, I'll put her on in a minute, she's a bright bird who's had a lot of pain and put herself through medical school at Queensland University as a single mum, has practiced medicine and is now studying herbalism. So I thought she's good to put on talking first to give you a general introduction to where it's at the moment. And then I've got a lawyer, Sally McPherson, just to be clear on a few points. It's a big drama for all of us roadside drug testing now. I mean, it's been hard enough being a pot-smoking hippie for 40 years, you know, the whole thing that goes with that, the judgment, society, just the fact of being a criminal, bringing up your kids. I brought up 6 kids, not on mine, but it's been like a huge thing. You know, we're criminals. So, Sally, it's really important what you know, anyone has questions, talk to Sally. She'll be here all day and tomorrow. But roadside drug testing is a whole new thing for us. Bringing in sniffer dogs was one thing, because cannabis is different to all the other illegal drugs. Totally different. It's like just a dried herb that's never killed anyone in thousands of years of use. It's super safe and super handy for lots of things. All the other illegal drugs are either processed from a plant, like heroin or cocaine, heavily processed, or they're just chemicals. So pot is in a whole new ballgame, but it's particularly different because it's fat soluble and stays in your body a long time. Whereas, you might go out to a big party on Friday night, all those other drugs are pretty much out of your system on Monday. But cannabis, it's going to be in there for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or in my case, I'm a daily user, maybe 2 months. So this is a big debate at the moment, because saliva, roadside safety should be about impairment, no matter what drug you're using. Personally, I think I'd be comparing cannabis to pharmaceuticals rather than alcohol. It's coming from a plant, it's going to be mind-altering, it's going to make you feel better. Does that make you a worse driver or not? It's a big debate. And for me, who I use cannabis regularly, it's different to someone who's had their first joint and maybe had a beer. I don't want to get in a car with them either. So I'm actually going to court next week on this issue. Lots of people around Nimbin have been busted driving. It's like a no-brainer for the police to set up on the Lismore Road. They're guaranteed to fill their quota in the morning. So it's been a real stumbling block for us. Sniffer dogs were one thing, because cannabis is bulky and smelly and way easier to detect than any other drugs. You've got to smoke it, it stinks. So you don't in fact have to smoke it, but traditionally that's how most young kids, for example, do. So we actually think the current drug laws, where cannabis is in the same basket with ice, with all the other drugs, they're all just illegal. Cops are meant to treat them the same. Fortunately, they don't all. It's changed drug trends. Our super efficient policing of sniffer dogs, now saliva testing, has changed drug trends. Young kids are using different drugs they're not going to get busted with, which has not been a good outcome at all. But it's hard to get through to people on that. So you'll hear different things during the day, but the passion of the Hemp Embassy up in town, which it's good for you to visit if you haven't, has been about changing the laws, just that we made a mistake. Cannabis should never have been illegal. So it's all very well to be talking about medical cannabis. 99% of cannabis users are barely touched by the laws at the moment. So we're all still not fitting the quota. You're not allowed to drive if you use cannabis. So we've got a long way to go. But certainly I think what's happened in America, where more than half America has legal cannabis now, what's happening in Canada and now in Europe and the South American countries, big changes are happening very quickly. So it's smart to sort of get your head around the whole cannabis debate, I think, and realise I would just say we've been lied to. We've really been misled with the drug laws, which are all, I think, about profit. In the end, there's massive profit to be made out of making you feel good, taking your pain away, and rather than sort of complement pharmaceuticals with the herbal world, they've outlawed it, which is a real pity. Anyway, I'll introduce you to Dr. Deb. Here she is down there, and who's had a long time experience as a doctor using cannabis, knowing about cannabis and how good or not good it is. And thanks heaps for... a little bit of homework. So there's lunch on in the cafe down there. We'll probably stop in a couple of hours. The toilets are just at the back here. There's a couple... I totally recommend this book. I wanted to point it out to you. I think it's can be $20 out there today. It's $25. It's a fantastic, fairly new book on really how the war on drugs came about. Totally recommend it to you. And there's another book out there, Andrew Catalaris, who'll be talking later, has just written. It'll have to be a great read. And there's flyers of Plant Med, Dr. John Tay, who'll be talking after Sally. So I just wanted to point out those few things. That's an annual newspaper we print. The Mardi Gras, it's got of the pot papers. You're welcome to take as many copies as you like back to your friends. And this is Sister, who's in charge of all the noise and screen, and we'll say more. Here, Deb, it's your go. Okay. Thanks very much.
Oh, hang on, use this one. We'll use that one for now. We'll just use this.
Good morning.
Morning.
Ready to be educated? Well, we try and make it fun. Normally the talk I give this morning is a little more educational, but tomorrow after lunch, when everyone's sort of like not even wanting to come back in, we have a trivia quiz, and that generally livens people up a bit. And you get a chance to learn a bit more. It's a very relaxed sort of quiz. So today I want medicine, as in the actual bottle that you get. What is in your cannabis medicine? Because as you know, there's a very, very limited supply of legal cannabis products out there if you can negotiate the ridiculous maze of legislation and finally get your legal prescription in your hot little hand. You really want to know what you're getting. One thing I can tell you is that the doctor who's prescribed it to you almost certainly has no idea what you're getting. There really is no education on cannabis medicine. There's no degree that you can do in Australia on cannabis medicine, no courses that you can do apart from very basic ones for doctors. So you need to understand that your doctor will know less than you. So part of your job is to educate your doctor how to prescribe cannabis medicine. Now, traditionally, we go to a doctor and we tell them what's wrong with us, and they do a history and examination and arrive at a diagnosis and offer you a treatment, most of which is allopathic, and that is they'll write you a prescription. You'll get your holistic GPs that will talk about diet and supplements and stuff, but on the whole, they will be reaching for their prescription pad. And so when it comes to prescribing cannabis medicine, really it's a very foreign thing to most GPs, and this is what you need to understand, that they don't know how to do a holistic history and examination. They don't know how to do a holistic treatment. I mean, one of the things with cannabis medicine is that to prescribe it properly, you would never prescribe it in isolation, because it will always form part of a treatment plan for that particular patient. So you can go to your doctor and say, I've got this really bad arthritis and I'd like a prescription for legal cannabis, and he'll say, okay, you'll have to go to this access clinic and they'll do this and that and charge you all this money, and you will walk out with a generic prescription for some sort of cannabis medicine. So this is the system we have. So you guys really need to direct your doctors. So I'm going to go back to the basics and talk about what's in the cannabis plant and how it's extracted and what we would expect to find in the medicine that we're given. So cannabis is a fairly unique plant. There's only a few members of the family. I'm not going to be able to get that out this morning. Cabernet. Hops is a plant that is in the same family as the cannabis plant. But it's pretty unique, and as we know, as far as its uses, it's a pretty unique plant. There's not too many plants that cover such a wide variety of things they're useful for. And I'm sure that you'll hear lots about all that stuff over the weekend. So when we're describing the plant, again, this is a lot of controversy about that, but I think it's a simple way just to help you understand the types of cannabis there are. Is that there's three major species that are recognised, which is sativa, indica and ruderalis. Ruderalis comes from the steppes of Siberia and that sort of region up there, and is sort of like the poor cousin. They're now using it to reduce the size of a plant and help increase its yield in growing, but apart from that, we don't tend to use it much. Sativa is the one that originated more in South America, and the origins of sativa are actually quite clouded, and because traditionally we think of sativa as being industrial hemp with a low THC, but certainly strains of sativa looking plants with the long thin leaves and all the tall gangly plants certainly got your rocks off back in the 70s from South America. So the history of how sativa came to be is actually, it's a bit murky. But we tend to say that the industrial hemps are more of a sativa type of species. And when all the hybridisation started to happen back in the 70s and 80s, that's when sativa was introduced. They used those South American ones and introduced and crossed them with indica, and now of course we've got the hundreds and hundreds of strains we have today, and of course the last one is indica. And there's certain things that are just different between the two. Sativa is a longer growing time, longer to harvest, smaller yield, gangly plant, spindly more leaves, while indica is a short squat plant, ideal for indoor growing and making a profit. You get a high yield, short time to flowering, all that sort of stuff. But, that's nothing that needs to concern someone with their bottle of medicine, I suppose. One thing it might be useful to know is what strains are in your medicine. Well, I can tell you, you're not going to know that, because in their wisdom, these people who know nothing about cannabis medicine don't think it's necessary to tell you that. So all you will get a generic thing that has THC and CBD. But just keep in mind that it's good to know what strains are in your medicine, because we are talking about whole plant medicine. We're not talking about isolates and synthetics, which you have to be very careful of, though I do believe that what's being imported at the moment on the whole tend to be whole plant extracts. If it has a trade name like Epidiolex or something, it's a semi-synthetic, it's an isolate and things like that, but that's a whole other ball game, just to let you know that exists. Okay, so the next thing you want to know about your cannabis plant is what percentage of that plant is THC. And if your preferred method of administration is inhalation, then it will be important to know that. The average weed on the streets, well, I don't even like to talk about that because it's utter shit, and I wouldn't go near any weed that you can buy off the streets. You either grow it yourself or get it from someone that you know where it comes from. And that's an absolute. We really need to get rid of the huge organised crime people that just pump out this disgusting weed onto the streets. So that is a problem. But the government in their wisdom doesn't want us to divert to the streets. How could we? And yet that would be the best thing that could happen. Medical cannabis to hit the streets. Wow. Anyway, so that would probably be an average. Sometimes that can be very high THC, but lately the reports I'm getting back from people is that that's not even the case. They're using plant growth regulators and things that bulk up the yield, so the THC rate actually drops with that. So your average weed would be 14-15%, and that'll get you pretty stoned. You can get a fairly heavy indica, and some of the really good sativas will be up around the 18-20%, and that's probably a good level for the average smoker who wants it medicinally, certainly. And then you can get the super ones that are sort of up past 22-25%. Generally that's achieved with indoor growing. Right, you can do it out there, but it's a lot harder to do it outdoors than indoors. Now, just a little word about that before we move off that. There's always going to be those who prefer outdoor to indoor. Outdoor and greenhouse get the sun, but indoor can be much better controlled as far as a standardised medicine is concerned. So there's pros and cons to each method. As long as they're both done organically, then I don't think it's really a problem. And these days, now a little interesting, just a bit of interesting history for you, that I had puzzled over for quite a while, because my boys grew up at the time when hydroponic weed hit the streets, and I saw the effect it had, and I was really concerned. And of course now I know why. It's because when you try and push the THC level up that high, then you sacrifice the CBD, and hence you get the problems associated with having an unopposed cannabinoid, which is never good. And so that was the case sort of back in the 90s and the noughties. And I always puzzled as to how sort of that came to be. How did they get the idea to do this? And it was actually, take it back a little further to the late 70s, when the Dutch were the ones who were starting to hybridise. And they actually borrowed the techniques from flower growing, which was very chemical intensive. So the first skunk that came out to Australia and that was indoor grown followed the Dutch method, which used a lot of chemicals and forced blooms and stuff like that, and they managed to get the THC level up really high, and so that's why this evil skunk sort of hit the streets, and then it just went overboard. And then with the advent of medicinal cannabis, you know, about 6-7 years ago, then suddenly the indoor growing became, just swung right round to being indoor organic. So if you know you're growing, you know how they grow, and they say they're growing organic, they are. If you go and get your weed off the streets, you don't know where it's come from, and it smells like grass clippings rather than cannabis, yeah, you can be pretty sure you shouldn't have got it. So anyway, so that's just a little bit of history on how hydroponic as opposed to bush came around, and that's still out there. But really it shouldn't be. It should be, we need to know what strain it is and how it's grown. Okay, so what happens to that cannabis if you're not going to smoke it? Well, certainly for some conditions, ingested oil is far better, especially GIT conditions, gut conditions like Crohn's and things like that. Ingested oil, where it can have a local as well as a systemic effect, definitely works better. We tend to use inhalation for acute conditions, as to get pain or vomiting under control, and of course for the more spiritual aspects of smoking cannabis, which are equally as important. So the discussion for the moment will be on ingested cannabis, and I won't go into edibles, because that's a whole other field, and everyone has their own favourite cookie recipe that doesn't taste anything like weed, including me. But anyway, that's not what we're doing today. So we've got this. Does it matter if you're going to ingest the oil from it? Does it matter knowing the percentage in the plant? No, it doesn't, because once it's extracted, you base your yield on what you have extracted. To do an example, if you used cold ethanol to extract, you will end up with something that's quite dark green looking. And if it was tested, you tend to have a THC content of around 60 to 65%. The reason for that is that unless you can get it down to dry ice cold, it does not, it leaves the chlorophyll behind. And that's what gives it the dark green colour. Nothing wrong with chlorophyll, it's medicinal in its own right, but it makes it more difficult to tell how much of it's in your medicine, because you've got 35 to 40% that is not THC. And so in the plant, you can have up to 140 odd different cannabinoids. You can have many different terpenes, which is what gives the cannabis its smell and aroma and flavour and influences the type of stone that you get. You can have flavonoids, which are antioxidant, as well as other, you've got waxes, you've got sterols, all the other things that are found in the structure of a plant and in the function of a plant. So you've got this cold ethanol extraction that's 60 to 65%, but quite a bit of that is the rest of what's in the plant. And that's why it's a whole plant extract, because it's not getting rid of all those other goodies. Some of them it doesn't matter if you get rid of, like the waxes and the chlorophyll and stuff like that. It doesn't affect the whole plant profile. But one thing to remember is that the more concentrated you make your extract, however you extract it, as you approach over 90%, you're going to be sacrificing the whole plant profile of that plant. Does that make sense? I mean, if you've pushed your extraction to the point where you're certain you've got 90% THC, that's only 10% that's anything else of all those other plant constituents. So there's actually nothing wrong with having a lower THC content. Yes, it makes a difference in yield when you're extracting it. Obviously, if you've got a higher percent of THC, you're going to get a higher yield of THC, aren't you? That's just common sense. So, often the payoff is going to be, how much do we want to judge exactly how much is in our medicine, which you don't have to worry about if you get it legally, apparently, but it does raise questions about whether they know what's in their medicine. Or, you know, so that's how you sort of have to look at it. So you take another step up. There's many, you know, the super commercial way is supercritical CO2 extraction, which is, you know, you get a very pure end result. In the middle is butane extraction, which gives you a THC content of 80 to 85%. And so that is still, you're probably sacrificing at that point a little bit of the profile, but it's, let's say that butane is probably a reasonable compromise in the solvent that you use with the danger with the solvent. It's not a particularly dangerous solvent as compared to a lot of others. I mean, basically any butane that's left behind is less than what you would inhale if you lit your joint or your cigarette with a cigarette lighter. So it's all relative. It's all risk-benefit ratio as to what you do. So, are you starting to get a little bit of an idea of exactly how complicated it is to make a cannabis medicine? So, what you want to know is, yeah, you want to know how much THC is in there and how much CBD, but you also want to know the rest of the cannabinoid profile. Because we know from especially the research that's come out of Israel, we know that merely changing the extraction process...
Excuse me, Deb. White Hilux, 929. And the guy in the black Land Cruiser who was just dropping off some stuff for Wadsy?
Oh, no, absolute housekeeping takes priority every time. I'll accept that now, I can't remember what I was saying.
Israel.
Oh, the research from Israel. Yeah, shows that even changing the extraction of the process can change the medicinal properties or what conditions it treats best. The example that he likes to use, this is Didi, I can never remember his last name, Didi anyway, he's the famous Israeli researcher, was a guy with prostate cancer, had the same medicine as far as THC, CBD ratio goes. One worked really well for the cancer, the other one didn't. So he has the MS machine where you can put it through and it spits out exactly what it is. And it turned out that the difference was in a minor cannabinoid. So we're looking at the same strain with the same CBD-THC ratio being different in its effects because of the way it's extracted. Or you'll have a different strain with the same THC-CBD ratio as the other one, but has a completely different effect because it has a different overall cannabinoid profile and terpene profile, because terpenes are also medicinal. For example, myrcene is getting to be quite a well-known terpene, which we find mainly in the heavier indica strains, because it's quite a sedative sort of myrcene. So if you're looking for a strain that will produce an oil that will help you sleep and help your pain, then you would look for an indica that had a plant profile, cannabinoid and terpene profile, that promoted sedation and pain relief. And so, yeah, okay, just look up the book. We don't have a book. We don't have anything yet. This is like a new field of medicine, you know? So everything we are all doing is trial and error. But the one thing you can be certain of is it's never going to kill you. And that's really great. And doctors should be applauding this. You find it, it's so weird. Like, I was excited to learn that there was going to be a medicine I could use that was never going to kill my patient. I couldn't say that even about paracetamol, you know. So, and I'm thinking, why aren't all you other doctors really excited? Because I thought, because you're still brainwashed, you poor buggers. And you need to remember that they're brainwashed and they live in fear of discipline. You know, the care of the patient has way down there. Protecting their careers is number one. And you can't blame them. It's a terrible thing to fall from grace in the medical profession, I can tell you. I don't give a shit anymore. But when it happened, it was a terrible thing. So anyway, that's another story. So what were we up to? Okay, so you've got your legal prescription, so you've got a bit of an idea of what goes into your cannabis medicine. Okay, so what we tend to like are oils, because they're easy to take. You don't have to worry about any alcohol in it, being a tincture with people who can't have alcohol. And we herbalists, you know, apart from using alcohol, because we sort of have to, we're not all that fussed on alcohol. I don't think even doctors are, in fact, apart from the 3 scotches they all have at night. And so we've got a situation where we know that this is what we need to be looking for in our medicine. And we need to Google and see, what sort of strains have worked really well for this, what sort of oils have worked really well for this, so that we can somehow set up some sort of a guideline to how we should treat your condition. Some of them are really easy. Like, for example, chronic pain is incredibly easy to treat. Any old strain will do. As long as it's got enough THC and CBD in it, you know, you don't really have to worry about cannabinoid profiles so much. Unless, of course, you go back to the doctor and say, man, I mean, it worked okay for my pain, but I couldn't sleep. You know, I just kept on thinking about things all night. And you think, ooh, that just might have been a bit heavier on the sativa side. And so you go back. You say, okay, so what your standard doctor will do is say, oh, that didn't work. Let's just throw it out. No. No, it's a stepwise process. You go back and you say, this is what was good about it, but I had this particular adverse effect that I wasn't that thrilled about. Is there anything we can do about that? And almost certainly the answer will be yes. You can reduce the THC. You can change the ratio of THC to CBD. Even in the limited sort of choices we have now, there's still room to move, and there's still room to change and try and see what works. I mean, the worst thing that's ever going to happen to you is that you get paranoid and green out and you have to lie down and go to sleep. You know, and you wake up really hungry. You know, can you really say that about any other overdose? That you actually just wake up hungry? You know, so we're dealing with something I cannot say, you know, it's really safe. If the worst thing that happens is you green out, you put on an album of really nice music and lie down. You know, and you'll either go to sleep or you'll get so lost in the music you won't care anymore. So, you know, I mean, if you really want to shorten the whole thing, you have some orange juice with 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper in it. And it will decrease the stone. If you have extra CBD, take a little bit, half an extra dose of CBD. Take a bit longer, but it will decrease the stone as well. So there's even things that you can do, and you soon learn. And I haven't come across anyone who really requires, you know, for example, for epilepsy or whatever, that ever wants to go off their medicine because they've greened out once in a while. You know, it's sort of like, oh my God, I know what I've done, I'm going to lie down. You know, really? Can you say that about any other drug? So the whole thing is not to give up either and say, oh, it just doesn't work. You might not have enough THC in it. You might not have enough CBD. People who are cannabis naive are very easy to treat in some respects. You're starting with a blank slate. And often you can start with very low doses, and always, 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 no matter what you're doing, you start low and go slow. And that's the rule that doctors and naturopaths, all of us, it's the one rule we all try and follow. Start low and go slow. And you can't really go wrong. Okay, so what have we got available in Australia? Well, there's only one company that I know of, and I can't remember its name, that actually puts the cannabinoid profile on the bottle. In California, it's compulsory. In Canada, it's not. And our imports are coming from Canada. So the legal medicine that you get will only have your THC and CBD in it. You won't know what strain, and you won't know its cannabinoid profile. So really, for your standard conditions, arthritis and chronic pain, to help with your gut and all of that sort of stuff, then there's enough within those legal medicines to at least get you started and get a bit of an idea. The trouble is, if you go through an access clinic, they're only associated with one corporate cannabis company, and you're going to be routed to there, and it's like the whole thing's just a rort, which is why I'm still here spouting about homegrown medicine and, you know, illegal medicine, because it's still so far superior to what we can get legally that it's just ridiculous. The other thing that you're going to find is that if you start to require higher doses of THC, and often that's the case with chronic pain, you can require doses approaching the doses that you need for cancer, you know, up to, 80, 100 milligrams a day. These medicines just become prohibitively expensive because Canada's only allowed to export a certain percentage of THC in their products. So you can end up like one chap I know that ended up with the medicine that was supposed to last 3 months, didn't even last him 2 weeks, because instead of taking a mil a day, he had to end up taking 27 mils a day because of how dilute the oil is. So that's the other problem. When you get something and you work it out that you've only got 10 milligrams per mil of THC or even CBD, that's very dilute. You know, you're looking at an average dose of THC. I was going to use my whiteboard, you know, and I haven't needed it. Is there anything you've needed for me to write down? What was that? What are you muttering in the front row? Oh no, he's just muttering. Yeah, so, oh, now I've forgotten what I was saying again.
Deb,
yes?
we could say the average joint has about 150 milligrams of THC.
Okay, yeah, oh good, okay, yeah, so the average joint has, but you'd be lucky to absorb a maximum of like over 20% of that.
Sure.
So, though, they have shown that if you inhale and you don't exhale for quite a while, we suggest, not waiting until you pass out. But yeah, you can actually get well up over 50%. So the most effective way of getting the actual dosage into you is to inhale and keep it there. But most people don't do that. So, and ingesting, of course, you only get the oral bioavailability can be as low as a few percent up to 15%, maybe up to 20%. Depending on whether you have a fatty meal in it. Remember, it's fat soluble, so that if you have your oil with your meal, a fatty meal, you will help its absorption. There's lots and lots of different theories about what you can eat and not eat, and rah. Mango's supposed to make the hit better if you're wanting it recreationally, but it actually contains myrcene, so I would suggest that it would be more likely to give you couch lock rather than just improve the stone. But anyway, that's the spiritual side. Okay, so that's what you're looking at. When you see the lists of medicines that are available legally, these are the things you have to keep in mind, and that's what will keep you coming back to Nimbin, because it's just woefully inadequate, and doctors have no idea how to prescribe it. Okay, I might open to questions now, because I think we've probably only got about 10 minutes left. How are we going?
We're good. We can have some questions.
Yeah. So I've given you a bit of a start. Yes, you've got one? I hate your questions. She really asks really hard questions.
No, it's a comment, actually.
Oh, okay.
I've worked out that if you vaporise, right, using a volcano flame, vaporising a herb, then if you then take your refuse herb that's been vaporised and rolled up in a joint, you still get stoned.
Yes,
So
well,
method of
yeah, so that's something...
don't waste your refuge.
Yeah, so that's something I've heard. I've actually heard something similar from someone else the other day. In this case, it was trying to stop post-seizure vomiting. And this is what happens with legal supply. A legal supply, and still reduced to trying to smoke his vaporised stuff to try and get the vomiting under control. Something really wrong, isn't there?
Well, the point is was that from a one cone on the vaporizer, I got 4 bags out of it, which is awesome, because it was good hydro, and then I smoked it as well, so no waste.
So no waste. So yeah, so it really, any way you take cannabis is very wasteful, really. Yes?
Look, Doc, what I've got to say is in the 80s we found out about whole plant regime. I'm back to that. We've got to remember though, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So the whole plant has got to be used. What I found is that when you get a really good bud and you've got a nice stalk, wow, that's really great to chew. Yeah. You start chewing it, you know,
there is a
chewing it.
Yeah.
Now the secret is, it'll splinter.
Here, no good.
Yeah.
All right, get it.
Get them the mic.
Anyway, it's supposed to be a question.
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, you know, I just want to, as a statement too, I'll make a statement about this, is that one of the things about the whole plant medicine, which is something that we discovered back in the 80s, is that here we have something that you can really apply yourself to it and treat it with respect as a whole plant. You know, Shiva is one of the personalities that is there in ganja, you know, in this sativa, in this herb. And when you chew the stalks, after you've used the heads,
You're going to be quick.
then chew the stalks. So you got to, and the roots. Try the roots too. Don't forget that it's a whole plant medicine, and all of this extraction and all of this sort of stuff, all very interesting, very chemical. Being a chemical engineer, I'd stay away from it.
Thank you.
Thank you for your input, but we also have to compromise. We have to compromise with what the government's trying to give us. We have to, I mean, in an ideal world, we'd all be juicing every day. We would be using every part of the plant. And we would have that choice. But we don't live in an ideal world. And what we've got at the moment is a really shit list of legal products. And a few people in Australia that really know their shit. And I'm actually one of them. And you'll hear from a couple of other doctors today that also know their shit. So this is, yeah, so this is, am I getting the wind up?
No, you got 5 minutes.
Oh, right, more questions
3
then.
minutes, not too
Yes.
long.
Nothing, because I'm not registered.
Can we just repeat the question so everyone can hear?
Oh, she just said, what are you able to prescribe? And I said, nothing, because I'm not registered. I choose not to be registered. If we can get rid of the medical hierarchy and I can reapply for registration to be an integrated GP, that would be wonderful. But again, this is not the world that we live in at the moment. So I'm very happy to complete my education by studying natural medicine. And helping where I can, because I am one of the few people that can actually teach cannabis medicine. And this is what we need to be educating doctors, you know, it's not just, I mean, all herbalism is based on it. It's plant synergy. You know, the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. And so the entourage effect is no more or no less than just another example of plant synergy. And that's what makes natural medicine so utterly fascinating, because the number of phytochemicals in a plant, I mean, with big pharma, I mean, you're just looking at one molecule, and they're wanting to do these double-blind randomised controlled trials, which you can do when you've only got one molecule and you're looking at a couple of variables. You can never do those sorts of trials with natural medicine, because for a start, it's a holistic treatment program. You know, you can't control for all those variables. So we need to, until conventional medicine can shift away from that sort of evidence base, which has all been big pharma funded anyway, to looking at really valuable tools for collecting evidence, like N=1 study, where each person is their own study, or longitudinal observational studies, where we just follow a whole group of people for ages and then measure outcomes. As long as a herb, including cannabis, has a safety profile, then there should be no other... Why do efficacy trials? I mean, basically, we can change the way it works by changing their diet or their exercise or the other supplements they're on. So we're not getting an idea, so we can't measure it like that. And that's what we need to be telling doctors as well, is that this looking for these trials and doing all this stuff, each person's their own trial, and that is how we'll gather the data on cannabis medicine, so that in 10 years' time, we'll be able to say, you know, here is your genetic profile here, this is what, you know, here is the profile. Now, if we put that into the computer, it'll spit out a regime for you to start with. That is what we can look at for the future for cannabis medicine. But at the moment, it's just trial and error, and the government and really the medical profession just don't even know what they're doing. So Nimbin is a really good place to get education and to remind people about the whole plant thing and the natural aspect of it. But today I wanted to concentrate on the legal products and how the medicine comes about. And so I think one last question? Yes?
What do you think about liposome technology? Because with supplements you only get 5-10% absorption rate, but liposome you get 100% absorption.
Oh yeah,
So
it
the
is.
question was?
Yeah. So what do I think about liposomal technology? Yes, it is the flavour of the month for increasing absorption of many nutrients, vitamins, minerals, and other herbal supplements. And basically it puts it into a form where it can pass through the cell membrane more easily.
So is that just having your cannabis in a bit of fat?
Basically. So there's no need to, in fact, to make cannabis liposomal because it's already pretty fat soluble. That's the problem with the drug driving things, of course. So yeah, you will increase the absorption of anything that could be made liposomal, you will increase the body's absorption of it. If you have a look at your bioceutic products now, they're not all bad, much as I still hate the fact that it's just another type of pharma company, but they are whole plant products. And if you have a look, they will look very carefully at your vitamin ones because they will tell you if they're activated or not. So the bottle will tell you how well that will be absorbed into the body. And that's actually a really interesting thing to bring up, just as a general comment. Your vitamins and minerals, you need to really research. Let's just say Centrum is never going to cut it. I mean, the lowest level of acceptable vitamin is probably Swiss, and what used to be the best is now, I think they're really just starting now to change over their technology to better absorbed products. So Caruso's I think are pretty good. There's a few decent brands and bioceutics, of course. Mediherb, if you can access Mediherb, some chemists have Mediherb, otherwise your naturopath will. That all of their vitamin range and stuff will be, activated. So it's just another little general thing to realise that, and this is the problem, of course, with synthetic feeding of children who have PEGs, the poor little epileptic kids, because they're actually completely wrecking their guts with giving them synthetic feeds and with nutrients that they really can't absorb. That's another big talk for another day. The gut microbiome and its importance. That's another new exciting field of medicine. But I'm getting the wind up from the gnome with the white beard over there and his beanie. So I shall see you guys tomorrow after lunch for the trivia quiz.
You're going to hang around today?
Yeah. Oh, and I'll hang around outside if anyone wants to have a chat or anything. I'll hang around outside.
I'm sorry, I've got to move.
I'll only charge you, bud.
We've got lots of speakers, and she'll be here. So people who really want to talk to Deb, she'll be outside, and I really encourage that because it's a bit,
And I didn't even use the whiteboard because I couldn't shut up long enough to write.